Straight ahead on Law&Crime Daily. Closing arguments are presented in the Olympian attempted murder trial.
You should find Michael Barisone not guilty.
All the same things that established that the defendant wanted to kill show that he knew the nature and quality of his actions.
Plus, the doomsday duo. After months of uncertainty, an Idaho judge makes a shocking ruling. And testimony in the Todt family murder trial.
My sister-in-law was making a comment about, and we just kind of put it all together, about basically the world ending on the 28th and nobody has talked to them.
But first, it's Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. We are live in Fairfax County, Virginia, as opening statements are presented.
He wanted out, which drove her to concoct, to make up a story that was, at first, designed to keep him.
Mr. Depp's team is going to try to turn this case into a soap opera.
Law&Crime Daily, covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law&Crime Daily. I'm your host, Brian Buckmeyer. Jurors in Johnny Depp's defamation trial hear opening statements as Depp and his ex-wife, Amber Heard, paint each other as abusers and liars. Law&Crime's Anjanette Levy is live in Virginia with more on the arguments in the case. Anjanette?
Well, Brian, this trial will be full of salacious details about Johnny Depp, Amber Heard, and their marriage. Both claim that the other was physically abusive during that brief marriage. Johnny Depp smiled as he walked into court before opening statements began. He listened as his lawyers outlined why he claims Amber Heard defamed him in December of 2018 when she wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post saying she had become a public figure representing abuse 2 years prior when she was married to Depp. Now, Heard did not name Depp by name, but he says that doesn't matter, that everyone knew Heard was referring to him. He claims he lost acting jobs because of that op-ed. Depp's lawyers say the op-ed was timed to raise Heard's profile right before the release of a film she was starring in, which was called Aquaman. Depp denies Heard's claims of physical, domestic, and sexual abuse.
Ms. Heard, as you know, is an actress. When she accused Mr. Depp of abuse and painted herself before the world as a representative of abuse victims everywhere, Ms. Heard took on the role of a lifetime. She can't back down. She has been living and breathing this lie for years now. And she has been preparing to give the performance of her life in this trial. But this trial is about the evidence. It's about a man's reputation. And it's about his whole life. His ability to walk down the street, look people in the eye, without having them think he's an abuser. It's about the truth. And the truth will come out in this trial. At the end of this trial, we will ask you to render a verdict for Mr. Depp. We will ask you to tell the world that he is not the abuser she described.
But even Amber Heard's lawyers say that Johnny Depp called himself the monster and that he regularly abused drugs and alcohol, whether it was prescription medication or illegal drugs. They say that Depp actually blacked out one time for 3 days while they were in Australia and held Heard hostage for 3 days and abused her at that time. The lawyers say that what Amber Heard wrote in that op-ed is true, and therefore it's not defamatory.
He was, at times delusional, paranoid. He would be, mad at somebody else, then he'd be mad at her. And by the way, we'll talk about the prenup, but he called her lawyer, who she had because she wanted to give him a prenup and then they got married too quickly, so she was going to give him a postnup. He called the lawyer from Australia, called her a and fired her. You'll hear the testimony from the lawyer. As you go through those 3 days of Australia, some pretty horrendous things happen to her. He rips off her nightgown. He has her jammed up against a bar. He has hurled bottles and bottles at her. He has dragged her across the floor on the broken bottles and the liquor. He has punched her. He has kicked her. He tells her he's going to kill her. He hates her. He's pounding at her, pounding her. And then he penetrates her with a liquor bottle. That's the Johnny Depp that you're going to hear about in this case.
Now, Heard's lawyers say that Depp actually defamed her when he called her a perjurer and a hoax artist. But Depp's lawyers say Depp never said that. Those were things that his former lawyer said, and he believed those things to be true. Now, Depp's lawyers called the first witness on the first day of the trial. That was Johnny Depp's older sister. She testified about how they were both physically abused by their mother when they were children, and that the mother was also physically abusive to their father, and that was somehow a way that he learned to cope with abuse during the marriage to Amber Heard. Testimony ongoing. This trial will last for 6 weeks. Brian?
Thanks, Anjanette. Joining us today is criminal defense attorney Julie Rendelman and co-host Terry Austin. Julie, what impression were you left with the case after you heard both the openings from the defense and the prosecution?
So I think it's a fascinating case, but I admit I was scratching my head a little bit after listening to the openings. And the reason I am is I am shocked that we are in a position where Johnny Depp has this case. I don't see at the end of the day what he has to gain. All this is going to do, as far as I'm concerned, is potentially expose more and more about his drug use, his alcohol use. And keep in mind, Brian, that when we talk about abuse, abuse isn't always just hitting someone. Abuse can be texts. Abuse can be aggravated harassment. Abuse can be breaking things. And I think if the jury hears that, they're going to accept that she's telling the truth. And that's all they need to be victorious, even if a jury finds that at times she was abusive too. So I'm not sure why he decided to go down this road. It'll be interesting to see what comes as the days go on.
Yeah, especially after the fact. How's it going to hurt or help his image when we hear all these facts about him? Terry, how much of this case just boils down to credibility, and also to some degree, how much the jury likes Amber or Johnny?
You know, it's all credibility. It is literally Depp's word against Heard's word and what that jury believes. Everyone is saying, both the defense and the prosecution in their opening statements, that it is this op-ed. What was said in this op-ed? This is whether it was true and whether it was defamatory, whether or not there are damages. But it's more than that. To prove whether or not these statements are true, to prove whether or not there's been abuse, they are going to get into the details of that marriage. And so I think we're going to see a lot of flinging back and forth, and it's going to be very salacious indeed.
Absolutely. Now, Anjanette, what did Depp's lawyers tell the jury about when the marriage ended, and why is that so important?
Well, it's very interesting because Johnny Depp's mother passed away on May 20th of 2016. They say he went to their apartment that they shared the next day to collect some clothes and told Amber Heard, you know, I want out. He said he was going to Europe to travel with his band and tour. They say that basically she filed for divorce like really right after that. And then 6 days later, or 5 or 6 days later, she shows up at the courthouse to file a domestic relations restraining order. And they said that, you know, she didn't have bruises the day he came to the apartment, but she somehow had marks on her face the day she filed for the restraining order 6 days later. So it's some weird timing, and we're apparently going to hear testimony from police about that.
All right, we'll see how that goes with that timing of that incident. Thank you very much for your reporting, Anjanette. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, an Idaho judge makes a ruling on Lori Vallow Daybell's competency to stand trial. But first, witness testimony begins as Anthony Todt stands trial for the quadruple murder of his wife, children, and family dog. Welcome back. We're learning more details about a deadly subway shooting in Brooklyn, New York. Co-host Terry Austin joins us now with the newest information on this developing story. Terry?
Brian, more than 10 people were shot on Tuesday morning when a suspect threw smoke bombs in a subway car and began firing. It happened just before 8:30 in the morning near the 36th Street subway station in Sunset Park. That's when police say an African-American man opened fire. He's described as being 5'5" with a heavy build. Officials say the gas mask was on him and a green construction-type vest was what he was wearing. Investigators also say multiple people were trapped and eventually hit by bullets, both on the train and the platform. At a press conference Tuesday afternoon, New York officials announced multiple agencies are investigating.
I want to begin by assuring the public that there are currently no known explosive devices on our subway trains, and this is not being investigated as an act of terrorism at this time. We can also report that although this was a violent incident, reportedly we have no one with life-threatening injuries as a result of this case. This investigation is only hours old, so please note this information is subject to change.
Ordinary New Yorkers woke up in anticipation of a relatively normal day. They left their homes en route to school, en route to their jobs, and to a normal day, as I mentioned. That sense of tranquility and normalness was disrupted, brutally disrupted, by an individual so cold-hearted and depraved of heart that they had no caring about the individuals that they assaulted as they simply went about their daily lives.
Officials ask anyone with information to come forward by calling the phone number listed on your screen. Back to you, Brian.
And in Florida, testimony continues in the trial of Anthony Todt, a former physical therapist charged with killing his wife, 3 young children, and family dog in their vacation home. 45-year-old Todt faces 4 murder charges and an animal cruelty charge in connection to the deaths of his wife, Megan, children Alexander, Tyler, and Zoe, and the family dog, Breezy, who were all killed in December of 2019. Todt is accused of drugging his family with Benadryl before stabbing and suffocating them. Prosecutors say Todt lived alongside their bodies for weeks after their deaths. Monday afternoon, the prosecution began its case, calling several forensic technicians, deputies from the Osceola Sheriff's Office, and the 911 dispatcher who took a call from the defendant's sister before the bodies were found. That call, asking for a welfare check on her family, was played for the jury.
Hi, I don't know who I need to speak with. I'm curious if I can have a wellness check done. I had actually called on December 29th, and I had an officer go out because I was concerned. My brother and his family, they had all been sick, but there's actually been more developments. There's actually an active, and I just in conversations with my sister, my sister-in-law was making a comment about, and we just kind of put it all together about basically the world ending on the 28th, and nobody has talked to them. Nobody physically talked to my sister-in-law since the 26th of December, and my brother has stopped texting as of Monday. So I don't know if there's a way that somebody can go out. They are renting a place. They're actually being evicted from that property. But that's the last place that we know that they were supposedly at. But they have a condo that's right around the corner as well.
Coming up on Law&Crime Daily, hear from both sides as closing arguments are presented in the trial of ex-Olympian Michael Barisone. Plus, the latest developments in the so-called doomsday duo. Will Lori Vallow Daybell and her husband stand trial, or will it be scheduled on time? Welcome back. An Idaho judge makes a startling ruling as Lori Vallow Daybell of the so-called doomsday duo is now fit to stand trial. On Monday, Judge Stephen Boyce ruled Vallow Daybell is competent to stand trial after months of delays in the case. Vallow Daybell and her husband, Chad Daybell, face charges in the deaths of her 2 children, JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan, as well as Daybell's first wife, Tammy. The pair were dubbed the doomsday duo for a shared belief in the end of days. The couple was married in 2019, just weeks after Daybell's wife mysteriously died in her sleep. Then, Vallow Daybell's youngest children went missing. Tammy Daybell's body was later exhumed, and in June 2020, the remains of JJ and Tylee were recovered on Chad Daybell's property. For nearly a year, there were questions surrounding Vallow Daybell's ability to stand trial after she was initially deemed incompetent. This new ruling means the trial against Vallow Daybell and her husband can go forward. Right now, they're set to be tried together in January 2023. Vallow Daybell is set to be arraigned next week. Julie, do you think that with Lori Vallow Daybell competent, we may see a change in her defense, maybe even a plea, now that she can work alongside her attorneys?
So, Brian, that's obviously the million-dollar question. And, obviously I can't read tea leaves, but my guess is you're never going to see a plea from her unless she's had such a change of heart after becoming competent that she decides to cooperate and potentially testify against her husband. That's the only scenario where I see her pleading guilty. But keep in mind, being competent to stand trial is not necessarily the largest of bars. And so she still may and likely is quite mentally ill and unstable. And so I think those factors are going to play very deeply into what happens in the future, whether she goes to trial, pleads, cooperates, or any of the above.
All right, we'll see what happens. Terry, does this put their cases back on track, or are there other legal hurdles to get over before trial?
Well, Brian, the trial's on track for the moment, but I do anticipate that we are going to see so many motions that might just very well take the trial off track. So we're probably going to see renewed motions to sever the case. Perhaps we might see a renewed motion to change the venue. I know we're going to see multiple evidentiary motions so that we can keep out some evidence. If I were on the side of Chad, I would be arguing that anything that was discovered in his backyard should not be introduced, that the search wasn't warranted, and that kind of evidence as far as he's concerned. And as far as she's concerned, you know, she's just got to hope that the evidence doesn't come in against her, because it looks really strong at this point.
Yeah, and still the question is, are they going to be tried together in 2023, or is someone going to point the finger at the other? We don't know, but of course we'll give you updates here on the Law and Crime Daily as they come in. When we come back, the case is starting to wind down in the Olympian attempted murder trial. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, hear the closing arguments from both sides. Welcome back. After more than a week of testimony, closing arguments are presented in the Olympian attempted murder trial out of New Jersey. Defendant Michael Barisone is charged with 2 counts of attempted murder for shooting Lauren Canarak and firing a shot at her then-boyfriend, Robert Goodwin, in 2019. Defense attorneys say Barisone feared for his life at the time of the shooting and suffered from mental health issues, even sleeping in his stable up to the event. Ahead of the shooting, Barisone, a former Olympian, was training Canarak in dressage riding as she lived on his property. In the days leading up to the shooting, a string of 911 calls were made by both parties. Barisone saying he tried to evict Canarak, and Canarak saying she was being harassed. During closing arguments, defense attorneys told jurors the prosecution had not met their burden of proof.
The only evidence as to how the shooting occurred comes from both Canarak and Goodwin. The investigation starts and stops with them. It stops with Robert Goodwin pointing to Michael Barisone and saying he's the shooter. 2 people who I had indicated in my opening, and I believe the evidence has confirmed, have a motive to lie, who have changed their stories, left important things out, important facts, and have now walked into this courtroom, put their hand on this Bible, looked you all in the eyes, and lied to you.
The prosecution countered in its closing arguments, saying defense attorney did not show enough evidence to prove an insanity defense.
You still have to decide whether that delusional disorder made it such that he didn't know the nature and quality of his acts, or that he didn't know what he was doing was wrong. And the judge is going to tell you, you do not have to rely just on the doctors for this. You can rely on your common sense. You can rely on the other evidence that you heard. What did the other evidence show? All the same things that established that the defendant wanted to kill show that he knew the nature and quality of his actions. What's the trigger? What makes it on August 7th, 2019, defendant hasn't seen Lauren or Rob at all that day? What makes the delusion at that point click? Turns off his memory and makes him say, I have to go kill or be killed. This delusion of fear has now driven me to have to go and kill.
It's an interesting way to put it, the kind of clicking moment. But Julie, with everything you've heard, did the defense prove Barisone was insane or has an insanity defense when it came to shooting at Canarak and Goodwin?
And notice I'm flicking my eyes and moving my head because, you know, look, there is a mental illness there. I don't think there's any question. I think they established that. Did they establish that that defect rises to the level of an insanity defense? I don't think so. Remember, they bear the burden by preponderance of the evidence. I think there's no question that he was ill. I'm not sure that they're able to establish that he didn't understand right from wrong. Remember, this is kind of a hodgepodge of self-defense / insanity defense. So it'll be interesting how the jury kind of takes each one apart to come to a conclusion as to what they think is the right verdict.
Yeah, Tara, I don't know if a defense is actually going to be provided to the jury. I don't know if self-defense, I don't think self-defense is going to make it, and I agree with Julie. So what verdict are you expecting in this case?
Well, listen, the judge has already thrown out the self-defense. He said he's not going to charge the jury, and he said you're not going to mention it in your closing, so we won't hear much of that. But I think we will hear a lot of that medical evidence, and I think there was sufficient evidence to show that he was either insane or that he certainly had a mental deficit, and that it did affect his judgment and his ability to tell right from wrong. So I think we're not going to see an acquittal, and I think we may not even see a conviction. I think we might see a hung jury here. I don't know if all 12 of those juries are going to be able to get together and have a consensus. So I'm sort of predicting that we might see a mistrial here. Look, there were over 50 witnesses, and it was 11 days of trial, a lot of evidence to go through, and I don't think we're going to see all of those jurors coming to the exact same conclusion.
All right, we'll see how it goes, and we'll see how that split goes if it is a hung jury. Well, thank you, Julie, and thank you, Terry, as always. And thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.